Hello and welcome to our friends and colleagues joining us this morning. Welcome to the launch, the official launch of our new journal, Representology. We're live tweeting the event this morning, so please do join in. If you want to comment or ask questions, just use the hashtag Representology. I'm Professor Diane Kemp from Birmingham City University. I'm the director of the Sir Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity, and I'm one of the founding members of Representology. David, you need to unmute.
Amateur.
It'll be our only one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Kemp. Hello, I'm Dr. David Dunkley-Jimmer from Cardiff University and also one of the founders of Representology. Now, every 2 years, Cardiff University holds its Future of Journalism conference in which academics come from all around the world. These are media academics. At its last conference, one of our keynote speakers, Professor Nikki Usher, revealed research that said the majority of journalism academics are either in the US or Europe. 80% of those are white males, 40% are women, and that out of the 5 main top media journals, only 1 Black American was on its editorial board. Now, why does an academic journal matter? Well, there are several reasons. We know that newspapers and television shape our understanding of the world. Journals contribute to that. That's when you hear something like a researcher says this or a report says that. Now, a lack of published research from people with protected characteristics or from Black and brown people not only skewers our understanding of the world, but it denies us knowledge towards a fair and equitable society. So in the next hour or so, we're going to hear from a range of people who are making the difference, making the change. We know this is a collective enterprise and many of you are doing your own things and we welcome that. But for the meantime, let me hand it back to Diane. Professor.
Thank you, David. So we're interested in research and we value it equally. It doesn't matter where it comes from. That's the ethos of the journal, but it's also the underpinning ethos of the Sir Lenny Henry Centre. And we're after the answers wherever they come from. We value them whether they come from media academics or people who work in the industry. Now, the centre isn't just named after Sir Lenny Henry. Lenny is actually an active member of the centre. He's also on the editorial board for Representology. So it's only right that we actually ask Lenny to take it away and do the introduction. Lenny.
Good morning, fellow media professionals, academics, and of course, friends. It is my honour to be part of this important initiative between Birmingham City University, Cardiff University, and the Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity in officially launching Representology, the Journal for Media Diversity. Hooray! I'm over the moon about Representology. Not only is it a clarion call relating to diversity and inclusion in the media, but it also sounds like we're releasing a Prince bootleg album, so right on for that. The need to increase diversity in the media industry is more urgent than ever. It goes to the very heart of our democracy, principles of free speech, and how we view ourselves as a society. When only 13.6% of working film directors are women, we are literally seeing the world through a male gaze. When black people only make up 0.2% of all journalists, how do we expect stories to be told from our perspective and for our concerns to be addressed? And when only 0.3% of the UK film workforce are disabled, we should not be surprised that the lives of disabled people are almost non-existent on our screens and then marginalised in real life. The good news is, I believe, there's a real will within the industry to change this, but we can only do this if we work together, talk to one another and share knowledge. Representology will play a major role in making this happen. Let me give you a few examples just from the first issue. I'll build on what David just said. It was brilliant that Charlene White won the RTS award for Best Children's Programme, but what the journal did was enable Charlene to write about how she made it so diverse behind the camera so others could learn from the experience. David Olusoga's McTaggart lecture was simply amazing, but what the Lenny Henry Centre was able to do was research his one actual policy ask, the reform of Ofcom, and then published that in the journal with our researcher Dr. Peter Block speaking directly to Ofcom about it. To be honest, they're just grateful to be dealing with something that isn't about Oprah, Meghan and Harry. Everybody working in the industry knows there are far too few women and people of colour working in sound. The centre worked with talented Emma Butt to put actual members against the problem, numbers against the problem, spread that information via the journal, and then initiate discussions with industry stakeholders about designing a programme to address the issue. By the way, the programme hasn't found a home yet, so please contact the centre if you want to sponsor it or if you're a broadcaster and want to get involved. Now, I've literally just scratched the surface of what the journal is going to do and why it's so important. It's good to talk. It's even better when we write it down so we can share that institutional knowledge. Together we can create a better, more diverse media industry. The journal is one way that is going to happen. Right on for Representology. Here's track 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Lenny. Now, as ideas go, they don't really bear fruit until someone who has the authority to exercise that gives it that sort of impetus. And we are extremely grateful to our 2 vice chancellors from Birmingham and City University and from Cardiff for putting their shoulder to the wheel and giving this the force that we really hope will move it forward. Let's hear from our 2 vice chancellors.
Hello, I'm Philip Loudon. I'm Vice-Chancellor of Birmingham City University, and I'm delighted to be welcoming attendees from the worlds of academia and media to this event. It's an opportunity for me to thank Birmingham City University colleagues as well as our partners at Cardiff University for all of your work on Representology, for creating a platform for discussions, for research, and for insights into representation and equality across the sector. We want the Lenny Henry Centre to become a key UK research hub, critically analysing policies in the media industry with a view to increasing diversity and inclusion, to improving policy decisions, and to spreading best practice. I've no doubt that this event is going to be a key in helping us to achieve that change. Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm Colin Reardon, Vice-Chancellor and President of Cardiff University. It's hard to believe that conversations around diversity still need to be had in 2021, but recent events of the past year alone, and in particular how they've been portrayed in the media, show that those conversations are needed more than ever. In my piece for issue 1 of Representology, I mentioned that in universities, diversity brings creativity, new knowledge, new perspectives, and ultimately, new discoveries and fresh thinking. Diversity is nothing less than the driving force of knowledge creation, but new knowledge counts for little if it's not disseminated. Cardiff University is delighted and proud to be a partner in this groundbreaking project that celebrates and enriches the cultural industry as a whole. It'll give a broader-based platform to a wider range of voices and views than we've seen up to now. And it'll create opportunities to have the conversations about race that we so sorely need. In this way, Representology addresses a problem that affects not only the media but all of us at a time when change is urgently needed. Let the conversations continue.
Fantastic. Really great to hear from both our VCs, and as David was saying earlier, you know, it's really seeing the reality of people putting their shoulders to the wheel, saying go for it, and giving us their backing to get Representology off the ground, and we do appreciate it. But as they were both saying, really, I mean, research, getting the right research is vital, but it's not enough. It also has to be accessible, has to be readable, which is why our journal is a free download and written for a wider public. It also was really important to us that the journal looked like something, a publication that someone would want to pick up and read. And we all wanted to, I think, kind of doff our hats metaphorically to Barry Diamond from Cardiff University, because Barry is the man responsible for the look of the journal. And that's been really important to us. We wanted, and can I hear something from Lenny here to say right on, because you know, the title and that, yeah, exactly, the look of it was what we wanted, something that said, you know, this is going to be, it's going to speak to you, it's going to have, you know, really important information, and it's going to leap off the page. So Barry, we're just saying thank you very much to that. But if Barry was responsible for the look of it, then the person responsible for the content is the editor. And we were delighted when Kay Biswell said that he would join us in this venture. Piers is a renowned writer and critic. He set up the Race Beat. He's responsible for Resonance FM, and he's joining us now to talk a bit about that first edition. Piers, over to you.
Thank you so much, Diane. It's an absolute pleasure to launch this journal finally. And I thought I'd give people an overview of the first issue's contents. So Lenny's talked a bit about his conversation with David Olusoga about the experiences of race within the television industry. And we have that wonderful broadcasting success that is Charlene White, who takes us behind the cameras of her show IRL with Team Charlene, which has a children's audience and discusses in great depth conversations around race and structure, and just it would have been unimaginable as recently as a couple of years ago. We have Paralympian Will Norman, who talks about cultural representations of disability. And as Lenny mentioned earlier, we have those original in-depth research pieces, which have already caused a bit of a stir. One from Emma Butt about post-production sound roles, and one from Dr. Peter Block, which is around Ofcom's role in regulating diversity. We have David's wonderful magisterial article delving deep into the Black Sound archives. And I'm greatly honoured to have been able to republish the much missed Stuart Hall's ferocious television essay, It Ain't Half Racist, Mum, which is one of those wonderful pieces where the BBC was able to broadcast stuff critical of the BBC, and it started a kind of very public debate in, I think, the months in the run-up to the premiership of Margaret Thatcher in 1979. We also have pieces on freelancing, how the Financial Times engages with its female readership, and widening perspectives in political journalism. And later, a few of us will be in discussion with the author of that, Leah Cowan, whose piece examines the lack of diversity in British political journalism, why it matters, and why outsider perspectives find it difficult to get a foothold. Alongside all of that, we have reviews, we have poems, we have recommendations. We've got Marvarine Duffy, who's a wonderful board member of Representology, who's given 5 cultural recommendations in books, in television, etc. So long and short of it is, as you'll see from like Barry Diamond's exquisite visuals, this is an accessible journal. We want you to get involved about everything, not just content and submitting ideas for printing, but also ideas around what we should do in a wider context. Should we host more public conversations and webinars? So please get in touch. And that's representology@bcu.ac.uk. And I can tell you that issue 2 and the commissioning is already underway, and we've got some really, really big names coming. So I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Piers. Now, Piers covered quite a lot there. What we didn't cover was the range of academic journals that could also be submitted as well. So, Professor Kemp, we're looking for academic research shining light onto a problem, but also some solutions, bringing us news and aspects of media representation. What sort of things do you think we're looking for?
Well, all the things you just mentioned there, David. I mean, we're looking for new research, new academic research. We're looking for the rigor that brings. And we want to, so maybe it is shedding light on something that actually hasn't been so publicly known, which is one of the excitements for us about the Emma Butt piece. But it might also be some new perspectives on some of the common themes that we already know about. Particularly, we're looking at problem solving, and we're looking at that sort of sense of interdisciplinarity. It doesn't have to be that the problems that have been solved have been necessarily in media. If there's a way in which we can learn from it, we're really after some cutting edge academic research. But the key thing for us is, and this is the trick, if you like, it's making sure that it's written for a wider public. And there are some fantastic academics out there, and some of their research is absolutely wonderful. And I think for us that what we are concerned about is we want that to be read by the wider public, by the media industry. And sometimes the language, sometimes the references may not necessarily help in that way. So brilliant that that is published in other journals, but if you are an academic looking for it to get a sort of much wider readership outside of outside of academia, really, please do think about approaching us. And as Biz said, I mean, the email address is the same. It's representology@bcu.ac.uk. Please do get in touch, and we will certainly come back with more. David.
And Professor Kemp, Diane, as you were speaking, Marcus and I had the pleasure of speaking to Professor Kurt Barling at Middlesex University, who essentially is in the throes of doing a massive study from that epoch of a program in the 90s, Black Britain, and the people who worked on it, where they are now, and what it's going to do. So as you were speaking, it reminded me of the sort of research he's doing that will go into that. Then conversely, also Kevin Osborne, who's the CEO of Create Equity, who's looking into equitable enterprise investment over the next 10 years. So those are the sort of reports, as he was talking, that sort of came to mind. Now, the people who are going to be there wishing and sampling and going through what's going to be coming to us are the editorial board. And we want to give you a flavour of some of them.
Hello, I'm Marvarine Duffy. I'm part of the editorial board for the journal, and I'm also senior lecturer and director of undergraduate journalism courses here at BCU. The journal's really important. It fuses practitioner viewpoints and also academic research underpinned by peer review. That for me is really important. I can take that into the classroom and help my students connect practice and research that bit further. But also, because I'm teaching journalists of the future, they are asking me questions every day about whether or not they're going to be accepted into the industry and appreciated into the industry. Is it going to be harder for them because they're working class? Harder for them because they're from an ethnic minority background? Harder for them because they're disabled? Harder for them because they're LGBTQ? You name it. My students are very attuned to what is going on outside in the industry. So I'm really proud of the fact that this journal is really asking some tough questions. And I'm really thrilled that media organisations have responded well to that and have asked to work with us as a centre to do more work to ensure that eventually, we do have a fair and level playing field for everyone in the industry, no matter who they are. That is real impact.
Hi everyone, my name's Carl Gombrich and I'm absolutely delighted to be on the board of Representology, the journal for diversity in the media. We're interested to hear from a wide range of underrepresented groups to give media the proper flavour of this wonderful country and represent everyone in it. And that particularly, I think, applies to the people behind the scenes in media, the makers, the engineers, the doers, the commissioners, as well as, of course, the forward-facing people in front of the camera and more obviously showcasing their writing. So it's a fantastic venture. My own venture is setting up a new university on interdisciplinary principles, and of course the media is a fantastic arena for interdisciplinary practice. You really can't make an impact in the media without some kind of interdisciplinary understanding and practice. So I'm delighted to offer any expertise I can to this fantastic venture, which is Representology. Thank you.
So we have a big problem in social injustice in our society these days. It is threatening our way of life and our value system more than ever before. And the media do play a key part in solving it. So Representology is a timely, if not overdue, intervention into this. And we aim to be right at the intersection of professional, academic, policy debates around media, diversity in the media and the media in diversity.
Fantastic. So those were just three members of our editorial board, and some of the issues that they were raising there are the kind of things that we talk about quite a lot when we have really interesting and often quite feisty editorial board meetings. We wanted to represent some of that kind of discursive quality which the journal has in our launch event. And so first of all, if you want to take part in it, if you've got any questions, don't forget there's a Q&A section here on Zoom, or you can use the hashtag Representology on Twitter. Please do get involved and put a question in. Marv, who you saw there, Marvarine, is going to be making sure that those questions are put to the panel. But to chair that panel, I want to bring Biz back in so he can introduce the panel and we can get this underway. Biz.
Thanks so much, Diane. I'm delighted to welcome two fabulous speakers. We have Leah Cowan, who's the former editor, politics editor of Galden magazine, who has a new book out, Border Nation, on Pluto. It's about a story of migration. And also Marcus Ryder, who is the co-author of Access All Areas with Lenny, and it's a diversity manifesto for television and beyond. So welcome, Leah and Marcus. I thought we would kick off by having a broad conversation around the importance of capturing the experiences of people of colour working in media. And myself and Marcus thought we could also delve into the idea of memory. So I'd like to ask the panel, how will this year, the year of COVID and George Floyd's death and its transatlantic move across to Britain, how will that be seen in the history of cultural expression through media in the UK?
Well, I think to jump in, I think it's very notable that we still had a broadcaster saying on Newsnight to George the Poet in the wake of the death of George Floyd, "You're not putting America and the UK on the same footing, are you?" And saying, you know, that our police aren't armed, they don't have guns, the legacy of slavery is not the same. Of course, the legacy of slavery is incredibly comparable. Britain just kind of offshored its slavery, but it can't wash its hands of that history. And obviously, as people of colour and Black journalists, we know this. Biz used the phrase outsider perspectives, but I see us as insiders. You know, we know the cold, hard reality of this country's history, and we don't have the wool pulled over our eyes. But if we aren't the broadcasters around the table asking the questions, I think this is where we remain at still, this kind of level of conversation, despite the fact that police brutality is happening with regularity on these islands, and the long history of that brutality reported on by Black people and Black-led publications like Race Today back in the day and The Voice, still reporting on this issue. There is this kind of amnesia and pretense that the bad things have happened and are happening in America, but we know how to behave over here, and it's just not accurate.
I'd want to pick up on some of the issues, or one of the words which you've already talked about, Biz, and Leah just talked about, which is the amnesia. So we constantly have these watershed moments. We have them, as far as I can remember, with regards to Brixton riots. We have them with regards to Stephen Lawrence. We have watershed moments, but what invariably happens is that we don't build on them. We then don't forget the lessons, positive and negative, which happened. And there have been positive things which have come out with regards to how broadcasters have addressed George Floyd. There's absolutely no doubt. There's also negative things, but there's definitely positive things as well. So Charlene White, there's almost no question that Charlene White's program, which we've mentioned innumerable times now already, would not have been commissioned if it hadn't been for Black Lives Matter and the summer of 2020. You know, and so similarly, there are other things which broadcasters have put in motion. You know, but we need to make sure that, to use that well-known and cliche, that it's not just a moment, because invariably these are just moments which aren't built upon, and we need to make sure that whatever lessons we do learn, whatever progress we do make, we actually learn from it, we actually go forward, and we can build on it. Otherwise, it will be just yet another forgotten moment of history where nothing is documented as to what we did right, what we did wrong. So even, for example, the example that Leah has just talked about with regards to Newsnight, who has documented that? How can we make sure that the Newsnight journalists and the other journalists working at the BBC and Channel 4 and ITV can learn from that experience. So we need to make sure that it's not just in our heads or chats amongst our friends. We need to learn from the mistakes, and we also need to build on our successes.
And without a journal to do that, without a text, a primary text for us to keep looking at and being fed from, we're not going to get that. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and unless we have this institutional memory that Marcus is talking about, we're never going to learn. By documenting all of these things, these watershed moments, we'll be able to look at them and go, well, they did that in 1999 or 2021. Let's not repeat that mistake, but let's take that bit that was brilliant and move on from there. The other thing that I want to say about a journal is that in Marcus and my brief experience of writing this book that we're doing, which is called Black British Lives Matter, people want to talk. People want to share this information with us, and I think you're going to see that more from Representology as it goes on. David Olusoga gave a brilliant McTaggart lecture, but the things he talks about in the Representology interview are extraordinary and incredibly candid. And I think, if we can get more people to be that raw and that open and that smart about what they care about for the pages of Representology, you're going to see some extraordinary things, and we're all going to be able to learn a lot from that. So thanks to everybody who's contributed so far.
I mean, it's so wonderful to sometimes take stock and see how far we've come as communities of colour in the UK. We should always remember that the cultural industries were dominated for hundreds of years by a narrow social and political class, maybe up until the 1950s. Whereby the BBC and market-driven commercial enterprises were the prime disseminators of culture across Britain. And those, what I alluded to around outsider perspectives, only really came in through the extension of secondary education and those waves of migration that took place in the sort of post-war years. But there are still limits, and Leah writes this fantastic piece for Representology on widening perspectives around political journalism. And I wondered, Leah, if you'd be able to tell us a bit about where those limitations in political journalism currently lie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, as you say, for so long, people of colour and Black people in particular have had media coverage that's about us and not by us. And I think it really matters who gets to tell our story. I think it's very interesting to me that the same kind of high profile left-wing journalists who became household names by covering something like the Windrush scandal are also happy to go on a ride along to raid a nail bar with the police. And that's exactly what happens when journalists who don't have a kind of intimate and necessarily political understanding of race and racism in this country decide to report on issues of racism just because it's a kind of hot topic. I think it gets very messy. And I think it is important to see ourselves in the media, to know that we belong in that space. I mean, I was trying to think earlier of who the kind of people of colour were that I used to see in journalism and broadcasting. I grew up with Moira Stewart on the news. And I think it's very important when it comes to seeing someone kind of doing the job and thinking, maybe I could do that too. I could be an authority on current affairs or politics, and it makes a big difference. I think it's very interesting to me that the person that I've been, or the topic that I've been asked to speak most on in the news is Meghan Markle. But I have very little to say about her. She seems very nice. I don't know her at all, but of course, the media is racist, the monarchy is racist. We know that about these institutions. What I don't know if there is space for is a real conversation around structural inequality, about the racism of borders, about state violence. These are topics that I think warrant a million think pieces, in my opinion, but they're not the things that, Newsnight producers are calling me up to speak on.
And with this as the backdrop, what would we say are the limits to the existing schemes to get more people of colour into established media institutions? I know Lenny and Marcus, you both have years of experience within the television industry. Are those schemes to get people of colour and therefore get more experiences of people of colour out in television, are they doing their job?
Do you want to go ahead, Lenny? Or
no, I'm so depressed already. You carry on. I'm going to take a Valium while you speak and think very deeply about what Biz has just said.
I think that we need to take the term structural racism seriously, because structural racism actually means addressing the structures. It doesn't mean having the existing structures and then getting a few more women in positions of power, or getting a few more people with more melanin in positions of power, or what have you. It's actually about addressing the structures and addressing the media ecosystem. And sometimes we recognize this. We recognize that if we want good regional and local journalism, we need to create a system where regional and local newspapers can survive and thrive. It's not enough just to make sure that we get more people from, I don't know, Birmingham, Manchester, wherever, working for The Guardian or working for The Sun. We actually need to make sure that local newspapers survive, so that there's an ecosystem that properly works. And similarly, the problem with sometimes thinking of it as a scheme, right, is that even if there are problems with schemes working, but even if the schemes worked, right, all we're doing is just having the existing structures and then just trying to increase the diversity within them. If we believe, and everyone I talk to does seem to believe that there is a structural problem, then we need to look at the actual structures of the media industry and how do we address that? How do we create a media industry with regional journalism, journalism that reflects disability, journalism which reflects ethnicity? How do you create that ecosystem that fairly represents us, rather than just thinking of it as a numbers game?
Yeah, sorry, just to kind of tack on, I completely agree with Marcus. I think one of the big issues prohibiting a more kind of accurate and representative workforce is largely that of workers' rights. I mean, who can afford to do an unpaid internship or take a job with an 18K salary and somehow pay rent and buy food in London? I mean, I think if you don't tackle those issues, we're going to keep hearing the same voices and the same perspectives in media. And for me, it's not just about kind of who is running the show, but how are they running it? I'm personally not that interested in a form of kind of black capitalism. I don't want exploitative bosses and terrible working practices and unpaid overtime. I want to be in a unionized workplace where I have kind of collective bargaining power. And if my employer does something that doesn't work for me, then we have a voice and a platform to push back against it. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Marcus.
I think the idea of having a safe space from where you can air your grievances, whatever they are, without fear of being fired, is a really good point, Leah. I think this is about allyship. This is about the people in charge thinking in terms of a power share and not a power grab. Nobody's saying, we just want to hire a bunch of black people. We just want loads of white women. We're just saying, why don't we share the power and have the opposite of an echo chamber? Let's invite debate. Let's invite problem solving by discussion and not being so raw about, because the minute you say systemic racism, people get incredibly upset and they think you're talking about them. We just want to have a conversation. We just want to be included in that conversation. And we want what we offer to have weight and to have meaning and have effect. But if we're not in the room where that stuff gets discussed, that's not going to happen. So in terms of our white, able-bodied, heterosexual executives, we want a place where we can exchange views and ideas with you and know that our views will have weight and meaning and effect. And so that's to do with power sharing. And this is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about something small. It's a big thing. And it's going to mean some people bending rather than breaking.
That idea of this safe space that Lenny talks about was one of the key drivers of us setting up the Race Beat, which myself and two wonderful women of colour editors, Amy Hall and Rebecca Omanira Oyenkanme, set up a couple of years ago, which was we would speak to people at all levels of journalism in the UK, from sort of relatively senior commissioning editors right through to people just breaking into the industry. And they felt it was difficult to talk about race and racism with their majority white colleagues. And they wanted a space to kind of collaborate and air their grievances with other people of colour. And it's been incredibly fruitful, because you will go through every established institution in both press and broadcasting and hear from people of colour experienced in those industries shocking tales of, and instances of racial discrimination. And actually myself and Marcus in Parliament, we did a call out for, scores of people got back to us and we anonymised their experiences of racism in major institutions, many of which would consider themselves liberal and anti-racist. So this isn't a left-right thing. It's a sort of structural and systemic issue in relation to the media. I thought now would be a good time to go to audience questions. And we've got Marvarine Duffy, who's wonderfully putting together some questions from the audience, both in the Q&A and on Twitter. And if you've got questions for the panel, please use the hashtag Representology on Twitter. We have a question from Deborah Streetfield from the Careers Office, who says, my question is simple. To expand access to media and creative industries, how will the most disadvantaged access the knowledge and contacts to enter an industry which is one of the most closed?
I'm not sure that and this is the reason why we have the centre. This is the reason why we have the journal. In that, I'm not entirely sure that the question is. I agree with the assumption in that question, in that if we look at entry-level positions, often it's not, the media industry isn't that close. Certain elements of it aren't closed. So I think factual programs, it's not as closed. I think in drama, it is more closed. And so we need to be really specific, and then we need to know where to target. And then it's often closed. This really interesting piece of work that's just been done that I was listening to, I think it was Planet Money. So there's a really interesting piece of work which is looking at networking with your boss and how that seems to help men more than women. So it's also then looking at entry level, it's looking at whether it's closed for higher levels, what genres is it more closed for? So that simple question, I think, for me, highlights the fact that there are no simple one answer fits all. There will be different answers depending on the genres. There'll be different answers depending on whether we're looking at entry level or whether we're looking at middle management, working at higher management. And the broadcasters and other media stakeholders need help, and they need answers as to how to actually achieve that. And that's I know I keep banging on about it, and we all keep banging on it, but that is the reason for the journal. So the broadcasters who are working in factual programs go, okay, that is relevant for me, if we're going to address the problem of middle management, or that study that was hidden away in a journal, now that there's something which is slightly more accessible, that's for me if we're going to address entry level in drama. So it's making sure that we don't have any massive assumptions, that we really try and drill down so that we can give intelligent answers backed by academic research, published in the journal, and then everybody's happy and we make the world a better place.
Okay, we'll move on to another question. We've got a question in the Zoom chat box, so please leave your question in the Q&A. How can white male media professionals work to improve diversity in the media on a daily basis or at a strategic level beyond eliminating microaggressions, calling out racism and prejudice, improving recruitment and development practices, changing organizational culture? So there's a lot to unpack there, but what can white allies do to improve diversity in the media at the workplace?
That's a good question. I think be an ally and look up what it means to be an ally. It's being civil, it's being somebody who's a proper colleague, it's speaking up when they see aggressions of any kind, it's weighing in when somebody of colour or person with disability or of an alternate gender is having a problem making their point heard, getting their point across. It's being there and using that privilege that you have to influence others who perhaps don't have the same capital as you. Being an ally is what it says. Stand up for people that are weaker than you and try and get them over the line. And I think that allyship is probably one of the key issues that we're dealing with at the moment. And people are having to learn because it's something they don't really think about. They're in their own little world and they booble along thinking, oh, this is fine and I'm okay. But it's when you have to start thinking about other people that your life becomes more complicated, but actually better, because it makes you feel better at work. If you're an ally, it makes you feel better in the workplace or at the at boardroom level. It's calling out all of those things. And I think that if you mitigate what you just said by saying beyond all those things, those are the things you care about. You've got to care about racism and sexism and gender oppression, all of those things in the workplace. Otherwise, you're not being an ally. So those things, you can't discount those things. They're part of the argument. So I think in terms of being a friend, being an ally, being a proper colleague, and having true diversity as opposed to fake diversity, and really supporting that. And then we'll see the needle move on this conversation.
I think to echo what Sir Lenny had said, diversity is never a kind of end in and of itself. It's a means to an end. And I think that kind of perhaps uncomfortable answer to what can white men do is they're going to have to give up their power. They're going to have to step aside. They're going to have to let other people come to the fore. I'm not particularly interested in kind of equality in the sense of, you know, equal to what? Equal to structures and systems that have been shutting us out for so long. For me, it's about parity and it's about justice. And what that means if we're not coming from a level playing field is people that have had all of the power for so long actually just sitting down and letting somebody else come to the front.
We have a question from Christine Geraghty in the Q&A box. Do the panel have views on the BBC, its handling of diversity, and the impact of streaming services such as Netflix and Disney on the conversation?
I think that it's about structures. So if you look at the economic model of the streaming services, they actually get more money. Their economic model and their structures are trying to actually target and attract smaller niche audiences to pay for their subscription. So making yet another program that gets a large audience, but only attracts the same people, you know, is not actually in their interest. Whereas if you look at an advertising, if your advertising model, or if you're trying to justify your license fee by getting a large audience, then often those structures mitigate against diversity. So I don't think that people in Netflix or Disney Plus are somehow more woke or enlightened than the people at the BBC. They're working to a different economic model and a different economic structure. With regards to the BBC and its diversity, BBC is so large that some of the stuff they do, you know, is terrible. You know, we just need to look at, well, I won't list what some of the bad stuff that they've done in the last 18 months, but some of the stuff is atrocious. But some of the stuff they do is absolutely brilliant. You know, they've done some absolutely brilliant schemes. They've, if you look at their publishing data, they publish data better than any, in my mind, there's still flaws in it, but they publish data better than any other broadcaster. So they do some really, really good stuff. So yeah, we could be here for another 2 days discussing BBC, what it does right, what it does wrong. It does lots of things right, it does lots of things wrong.
We have a statement sent in by Neela Butt, who's about to leave the BBC after 20 odd years. Neela's from Birmingham, and she believes that a willingness to improve diversity is often superficial, reactionary, and that regional representation is so important, but the processes are so complicated. But she hopes that Representology will help, and hope it's consumed and actioned upon by key change makers. We've actually got quite a lot of support coming through and questions about the journal. So Meeta Ladd asks, would the journal be open to allow young scholars, even undergrads and those early in their media careers, to contribute? I say yes, please write to us. Submit the submission guidelines are in the back pages of the journal, which is always free to access. So get in touch and we'll get back to you, whatever stage of your media career you're at. We have a question from Fiona Dunkley, who says, how does the industry move from great talk and diversity workshops to wider spread implementation? Initiatives are great, but how does genuine buy-in from board members holding the purse strings come about?
I guess it depends on the board members, right, Marcus? If you look at the diversity of the boards we're talking about, it's going to be really tricky to implement any of those things unless they are prepared to enter into the power share pact. This is where we need allyship in spades. And speaking about the BBC, I know exactly what you're talking about, but I do think there is a willingness to change. And it is a massive organisation, but I've seen steps being made to make changes, and they are small. But what I do know is that when breakthroughs are made, everybody in the industry will follow what the BBC is doing, which is why they have to continue making these steps. Sorry, Marcus, you were going to say?
No. I was going to say I should. I think Leah might want to say something. It looked like she was making notes.
Well, I've got a question for Leah directly from Philippa Childs from Beck2, which is, what more could trade unions be doing to help make lasting change and to support Leah's ambition of a strong collective voice?
I think it's very straightforward. Well, I hope it's straightforward. I think kind of working with publications to help their staff become unionized. I don't know the kind of exact stats around how many different journalists and freelancers, etc., are unionized, but through kind of people I've spoken to, there's a sense that, you know, if you're freelance and if you're not attached to a particular publication, maybe there's not much point in being in a union. And I think we need kind of greater literacy around what a union is in terms of kind of what it can offer to individuals if you're having kind of disputes in your workplace, but also the kind of political importance of being involved in your union and having that collective voice so that we can support each other, it not just being a kind of personal insurance thing for when things go wrong. So I think, yeah, whether it's the NUJ or other unions that are working in this industry, reaching out to freelancers and particularly smaller independent publications where there might not be such a large staff and workforce, and really getting union recognition. I think that's the first step.
And we have a follow-up question from the legend, diversity legend, Simon Albury, who asks, what progress has been made in establishing the independent racism reporting body in accordance with Marcus's Beck2 Race to be Heard recommendations? So Marcus, can you give us an update after you've written the report and recommended, made some recommendations? What's the industry done?
The short answer is not a lot. The longer answer is following on from Meghan Markle's interview with newspapers and most people acknowledging that there is racism and bigotry in the industry, right? I think that the argument for us not having an independent body is, it's almost impossible to argue against not having an independent racism reporting body now. The only thing which I would change if I was to write the report again for Beck2 is recognizing that it can't be just for the broadcasting industry. It needs to be for journalists generally and people working in the media generally. So I'm hoping that, again, if we look at these watershed moments, that we turn them into movements, that we build on them. And one of the things which I would hope is that what happened with the Meghan Markle interview doesn't just stop with one person from the Society of Editors one person from the Society of Editors resigning and the palace getting possibly a diversity officer, right? I actually hope we build structures, and a really good structure. And everybody who's listening to this right now, please feel free to engage. Please feel free to either talk to Philippa or talk to me. We've got a blueprint for a racism reporting body. We just need the support. We just need the finances.
We have a question from Lily Usher, which is, the panel have mentioned that diversity shouldn't be a numbers game. So do we think that fixed quotas are in any way helpful?
I think if it helps to get people through the door, then, you know, all and any tactics are useful. I think what's important is that kind of diversity, and again, I'm kind of reluctant to use that word, is seen at all levels. There's no point having a quota for kind of entry level, like junior positions, and your boards and your, you know, editorial boards are still these kind of snowy white peaks. If that diversity, or if that range of representation across all kind of intersections isn't at that higher decision-making levels, it's relatively pointless, I think.
I think that when we look at quotas, we need to make sure that they're intelligent and that they actually address the problem. So I can't remember who was talking about the purse strings, but if we're talking about quotas, just as when we talk about nations and regions, we actually look at budgets when we're setting quotas, not just staffing diversity, not just headcount diversity. You know, similarly, we need to, just as Leah has just said, we need to look at what levels, you know, and then we also need to look at critical mass. So, for example, you've alluded to, or somebody alluded to, the work that Kurt Barling's doing, and when we look at Black Britain and the role that Black Britain played at the BBC, that goes to the heart of the idea of critical mass theory and the idea of needing to build a critical mass. So sometimes if you look at quotas and you might hit a 15% target, if that doesn't actually build a critical mass which can change the culture, you know, then there's no point not no point, but it will have limited impact if you just reach that quota. Whereas if you actually combine that quota with budgetary quotas, with regional quotas, with critical mass theory, you know, and these are all things that we're talking about in the journal. And that's why I'm really looking forward to the work that Kurt is doing, you know, then that will be together. But just looking at an individual number and saying that we have to hit 20% or we have to hit 50% gender parity, or we have to hit, and we just look at one big number, I think that's normally not the most useful. But a combination of quotas, recognizing what the different problems are and why we're trying to hit those quotas, what problem those quotas are trying to address, is what we need to do. Rather than think of the quotas in and of themselves as being important, we need to think of what is the actual problem that the quota is trying to address.
Thank you so much for the brilliant audience questions left in the Q&A and on Twitter. And these are conversations that we will continue to have. I wanted to get a final word from each columnist, and it's a question from me, which is, if you were a young person of colour wanting to break into any part of the media, how would you go about circumventing the old boys network that has been in place in both press and broadcasting for a number of decades? Do you have one bit of advice for a young person of colour wanting to break in the media?
It's very tricky for me to talk to this because I broke in by winning a talent competition and being seen by millions of people one Saturday in 1975 when there were dinosaurs roaming the earth. What I would say now is use what you got. If you're a really talented person, or you think you're a really talented person and these things count, then I would use what you got, which is your phone, your computer, and just break in, you know, burglarize the industry and get in by any means necessary and start showing them how brilliant you are at what you do, and they'll come round to it. I got a mate whose sons went on a gap year and filmed everything they did, and they got offered an executive suite at ITV, and they said no. They already had internet followers, they already had advertisers, they didn't need a mainstream broadcaster. If you're young and you got talent and you think you're going to break through, then break through. Nobody's stopping you, only yourself. Don't wait for the old school, the white peaks of the boardrooms to invite you in. Just go in, because we've got access now. We don't need that. And I know and this is a way of bypassing structures. In the meantime, structures and systems need to be dismantled and put back together again in a way that is more inclusive, and we all know that, and that's a longer journey. But in the meantime, put your balaclava on and break in.
I couldn't agree more. I've got 3 kind of short points. One is to kind of join the networks like RaceBeat, join it with other journalists who are kind of up against the same struggles as you. Also, Twitter is terrible in some ways, but also great kind of egalitarian platform. You can DM your favorite Black journalists, POC journalists, and kind of pitch stories and try and make connections that way. And I think it's important that young kind of journalists also kind of build your profile with integrity, kind of work on stories that you actually care about, that actually mean something to you. We'll get asked to, comment on Meghan Markle 5 times a day, but let's actually write stories that are meaningful and important to us and build our profile that way. And I think that's the most kind of useful way to do it.
Everything they just said. And my experience is that Black journalists and Black people working in the media industry and Asian people and disabled people, they want to help. They know that we know the struggles. We want to help, right? Sometimes we're overwhelmed, and so we can't help everybody, obviously, but between us, we can. And so as Leia's just saying, contact us. I might not be able to respond to everybody, obviously, but, reach out to all the Black people, all the Asian people, all the people of color that you see, that you want, that you admire. Reach out to us, and one of us will get back to you. Honestly, several of us will get back to you. Same with disability, same with all the protected characteristics. We have been there, we know the struggles, and the vast majority of people I chat to want to help. And also, I should also say, and also, believe it or not, even the heterosexual, able-bodied white men want to help. Reach out to them as well. Some of them will help you. So reach out to everybody. Reach out to everybody.
Thank you so much, Leia, Lenny, and Marcus. Leia's book, Border Nation, is out on Pluto, and Lenny and Marcus's book, Access All Areas, is out on Faber. And I bid you farewell. I will pass you on to Diane. Thanks.
Thank you. General bookstore there. Fantastic. Biz, thank you. And you've already thanked them, but Lenny, Leia and Marcus, absolutely fantastic. Colleagues, that's a kind of snapshot of some of the discussions that happen around the editorial board table for Representology. Just loads of really, passion and interest and engagement. And we're always looking for more. If I was to pick kind of my 3 takeaways from that discussion, the key one that we keep coming back to is the issue of structural change. Meaningful change, change that still leaves an ecosystem where people are employed because actually, they need to pay their, food and rent and all the rest of it. How many more pieces of academic research could we look at to do with proper structural change within the media? Quite a lot. We'd be really keen to see that at Representology. So something about structural change. How do we make that happen? What does it look like? The importance of safe spaces to air grievances. I think, Len, you said, somewhere you can air grievances without the fear of being sacked. How important is that? It's not an answer to the issue, but it's a support mechanism. And the other thing, the big takeaway for me, was the importance of allyship, genuine allyship, both at an individual level, but also at a collective level, and where that can happen and how we can all support that. So certainly just from me listening to that, 3 takeaways that I took from that debate, really fascinating. Thank you all very much. David, I'm going to leave it to you to do the final summary and goodbyes.
Thank you very much, Diane, and thank you all. What a stimulating debate. What a force of conversation there. Diane, a couple of takeaways I got as well. I like the quotas, and there was lots there. Quotas: be intelligent. Sometimes the ideal quotas presumes the talent isn't there. They are there, and as I think it was Marcus who said, broadcasters need help. Let's help them. The journal can do this. Let's help the broadcasters as well. And then also, yes, this thing about young journalists. They talk about young journalists and write about sort of things that are about integrity. As both academics and former journalists ourselves, I teach foreign reporting and emerging journalism. We're there so that we can shape and help those who are coming to the journal to sort of get, onto that sort of that step. We've been there, as was said, and actually, like you said, BNI. So those are my roundups. But as we draw to a close, a couple of things. First and foremost, the first edition of Representology is available on the Centre's website. So please do send in your articles and research. It's representology@bcu.ac.uk. So that's representology@bcu.ac.uk. If you're interested in becoming one of our board members, please also get in touch. We're doing a skills audit, and so we want a full representation. Now, before we say thank you to you and the amazing tenacity and spirit that's gone on, you brought to this, let's talk about some of the people behind the scenes. And once again, to our Barry, a diamond geezer, thank you so much. And then also a couple of thank yous here. Alison Carter, Carl Snowgrove, Helen Beddoe, Katie Bollinger, Lyle Binnon, Michelle Alexis, Philip Harris, Richard Martin, Marvin Cole, Nathan and Colin, the editorial board, fantastic. And to our colleagues, both at the journalism departments in BCU and to JOMEC. So after an hour of scintillating and brain debate, we thank you so much. Please get in touch.